Does F1 have a swearing problem? Scott, what the do you make of this?
It is. It's a bit of a sensitive subject, especially if you are FIA President Mohammed Ben Sulayem. It's all part of, I think, what is his grand role model crusade. We've seen a few different examples of this. He's tried to make examples of people in Formula One plenty of time. Remember the clampdown, for example, of like jewellery being worn. Lewis Hamilton felt very much like a martyr in that situation.
Pants
Hamilton
as well, wasn't it?
underwear as well. Yeah, but jewellery was the main focus. Hamilton, again, for crossing the track, I think it was in Qatar last year, that had an explicit reference to drivers as role models in a very heavy-handed reaction to it then. And now it's swearing that's in the spotlight. Actually was already, if you remember Las Vegas last year, Fred Vasseur and Toto Wolff got warned for swearing in the press conference there. So not unprecedented. Basically, what Ben Sulayem wants is basically a clampdown on swearing. He wants the drivers to swear less in general, which is a bit of needless policing of driver emotion. He wants swearing to be broadcast less, even if it's bleeped out. And I think he generally wants drivers to be on their best behaviour in FIA press conferences, so no swearing there as well. And it just happened to be coincidence that Max Verstappen then broke this doctrine at the first attempt. Ironically, not when answering a question about the clampdown on swearing. It was a different part of the FIA press conference. It's badly handled, certainly badly handled. Fine in principle, but very badly handled. Especially didn't like Ben Sulayem invoking the "we're not rappers, this is motorsport." That was laced with some real, accidentally or not, some underlying kind of malice and intent there. Didn't like the connotation there, but I can't help but notice that you've been bleeped out yourself there, Glenn. So are we aligned with the FIA on this one in principle, if not in execution?
Well, I think we're being censored. I have to say, I don't mind the FIA having a position of please don't swear in our press conferences, but I think that's the way you handle it. You have a word with these people and just say, look, when you're in this environment that's our environment, can you please just watch your language? You know, talk to these people like adults, and you probably get they will act like adults in response. I don't understand like the first way of dealing with this, of being so heavy-handed and trying to make an example of somebody. Now, Ed, perhaps, well, understandably, Max chose violence, or perhaps that should be silence, as his way of dealing with or responding to his punishment. He didn't really talk in the FIA press conferences. He gave these impromptu media debriefs outside instead, and he started making noises about how this is the sort of thing that could, in the longer term, drive him away from F1. So is the FIA president potentially here picking a fight that he can't win?
Well, he can win it by constantly throwing misconduct charges or getting the stewards to constantly do him for misconduct. But I wouldn't say that's a win in the real world, certainly not in the court of public opinion. The problem is that by taking that action that he has in retaliation, Verstappen, a sort of passive resistance, he comes across very, very well. He's not refusing to talk to media or the outside world. He just reduces what he does in FIA press conferences. So that's a very, very good way to fight back. Mohammed Ben Sulayem has basically gone on the offensive in terms of being aggressive on this in what he said in public with the misconduct charge. So he ends up looking disproportionate, and Verstappen ends up looking like the voice of reason. He's played it beautifully. So you're not going to win that battle because you just make yourself look stupid. And as you alluded to, if you want to keep the language clean in the FIA press conferences, that's not remotely unreasonable. Everybody knows that you have to moderate your language depending on your platform, what you're doing. Max Verstappen understands that. That's not what that's about. But in taking this action, in going so heavy-handed, so aggressive, making it so high profile, Mohammed Ben Sulayem has made himself and the FIA look rather petty on this one. And I think that is losing because it just makes the FIA look stupid when they're doing something that isn't unreasonable. Own goal.
Yeah, I would agree that Verstappen handled this very well because he turned a conspicuous situation into a conspicuous response. He wouldn't have reacted the way that he did if it had been handled more maturely to begin with and a bit more elegantly. That would definitely be the word I use as well for what Verstappen did, because if you think about how he conducted himself and what he was actually saying, he made it very, very clear. He wasn't trying to make life difficult for the press conference host, Tom Clarkson. He wasn't trying to screw the media over. That's why he was willing to do those media sessions afterwards, he made it very, very clear where his metaphorical middle finger was pointed. And I can only applaud him for that, because I thought he did a very good job of it.
Yeah, and I think it's telling. He did have support from his fellow drivers as well. And I think we should point out very quickly that the swearing he got in trouble for, it wasn't malicious or angry swearing. It was just Max's casual way of describing that his car wasn't very good. So this wasn't some expletive laden rant that he needed to be reprimanded for. It's just, Max's approach to using that language is quite casual. He explained that afterwards. But it wasn't, this initial clampdown that we heard about wasn't supposed to be just people in press conferences, was it? Because drivers' language over the radio got mentioned as well. Ed, where do you stand on that? This attempt to police what drivers are saying in the heat of the moment over the radio, when effectively they are talking to their teams.
Yeah, that was very much the focus when Ben Sulayem originally talked about it. And it's completely absurd, frankly. They're athletes, they're competing. The heart rate's at 140, 150, 170 beats per minute. Something's gone wrong, they're annoyed. They are going to say things in the heat of the moment. And as long as it doesn't overstep the mark and go into something that's genuinely offensive, Yuki Tsunoda obviously bore the brunt of that earlier this season when he used ableist language. Quite right that that's cracked down on. But if you feel like someone's had you off or driven into you or something, then yeah, you are going to say things. And I think it's absurd to try and police that. Fine, if you want to try and persuade F1 to not broadcast it, that's a different thing. But to target the drivers in this is ridiculous. All the drivers think that. I'd be very interested to know what Mohammed Ben Sulayem, a driver with great success in rallying, but what he thought when he put an F1 car into the wall, when he did a famous demo that you can find on YouTube. Wonder what words were in his mind there.
The point you made there, Ed, about if you want to keep it out the broadcast, fine. That, to me, is what is so absurd about this, because that is, okay, there was some other stuff wrapped up in it, which is what I was saying at the start, but that was at the crux of what Ben Sulayem was saying when this became a talking point going into the Singapore weekend. He wanted it to be kept out of the broadcast as much as possible. But that's how badly he screwed this up. That's how badly his choice of words were. That's how heavy-handed it was. It became a much bigger controversy when the fundamental point he was making in the original instance was absolutely fine.
If he doesn't want it in a broadcast, his problem there shouldn't be with the drivers for what they're saying, because I think it's impossible to get people in the heat of the moment to not use that language in that way. His problem really is with the F1 organisation that broadcasts it, and frankly, I think that's also picking a fight that he can't win, because F1 aren't going to stop using these brilliantly leery radio messages with the wording bleeped out for the main broadcast, because using a phrase that we all know very well in 2024, it's good content. It's not going away. MotoGP are about to bring in trying to use radios, which seems pointless really in bike racing. But the feeling is that the reason it's going to be used is because it's great social media clips afterwards. It's great stuff to add to the broadcast. We know more about what these drivers really think. We know more about what's really going on than we ever used to before, because we get this radio stuff. So it's not going away. Interestingly, in the early days of radio being used in F1, teams and drivers would often deliberately swear so it wouldn't get used on the broadcast. And then F1 eventually worked out, well, if we just use a bleep machine, then we can use all of this really juicy stuff that they're trying to cover up. Let's bring it back to Max then to finish, and not, Max's choice of language, but something else he said, and I mentioned it earlier, this potentially making threats that these are the sort of things that could drive him away from F1 if there's enough things in the end that he doesn't like about being an F1 driver, and this clearly falls into that category. So Scott, we've heard these threats before from Max. How seriously should we take it now?
Yeah, so I would say that it definitely, I understand why it sounds a bit petty when Verstappen is seen to have said that he might leave F1 over this swearing row, because it looks and sounds like a child being told off for using bad language, and now he's having a sulk. But that's not what's happened here. First of all, Max was asked a leading question about how this feeds into his desire to ultimately leave F1 and what he said before, and he just answered it honestly. He wasn't going out of his way to say, "Oh, right, well, that's it. I'll go away. I'll leave then. I'll take my ball and go home." It's not like that. What he's saying is this feeds into wider frustrations where he ends up thinking, actually, is this worth it? Because he's made a lot of money many times over. He's won 3 World Championships, could win a 4th this year. He's achieved everything and more that he set out to in Formula 1. We know he wants to go and do other stuff outside of Formula 1 at some point. And all of this stuff, this feeds into things like frustration with the expanded calendar, too many street races, the overexertion on drivers with silly PR and media activities that he doesn't agree with. And so if you're then going to clamp down even further and do some very low level, admittedly, censorship on what the drivers can say and when, then Max is just justifiably going, actually, do I want to be part of this in the long term? And I sincerely believe the answer to that will be no. I don't think he's going to quit in the next couple of years over this, but it will feed into a process that ultimately makes him go, this isn't worth it anymore.
Yeah, he's absolutely not going to walk away from Formula 1 because he can't swear in a press conference in itself. That would be ludicrous. But it does come back to that earlier point about the way they've chosen this battle. Verstappen has a huge amount of power in this, because if one of Formula 1's all-time greats is willing to walk away from Formula 1 for myriad reasons, of which the behaviour over the swearing is one of them, then that reflects very badly on Formula 1. Now, the FIA and Ben Sulayem may have the legislative and the regulatory power, but Max Verstappen, in the real world, has got the real power there. Ayrton Senna used to wield that very well. He made the governing body look quite stupid and petty at times as well, with how he was stood up to them. He's not the only driver to have done that. And that's the power that Max Verstappen has got. And that's why it's just so odd that they've gone so aggressive with this, the FIA. And it's a shame because, believe it or not, the FIA does have some very good people in it doing some very, very good things. And as we've said, they're within their rights to want to police swearing, say, in official FIA activities, in press conferences. But dealing with it this way is completely bizarre, and it's just made it so easy for Verstappen to, in what he's saying, what he's doing, what he's not saying, and where he's saying it, just show them up for what they're doing. And that's why it's just such an absurd situation. It just looks very, very petty for Formula 1. That reflects badly on Formula 1 and the FIA, and that's why this can't keep happening, because there's only going to be one winner in this, and it's not going to be the FIA.